Peppa and George spent the weekend at the country house. While their parents relaxed at home, they played in the garden.
George, let's go look for treasure.
They got carried away and dug too deep. Suddenly, they fell into some underground space. It resembled an underworld. Everything around exuded horror. Peppa and George walked along a dark corridor and emerged into a huge ritual hall. The room was lit by a red glow. Walls were draped with chains. Bones and skeletons lay scattered around, and in the center stood a table.
George, look! This must be a sacrificial altar.
Peppa, I think we should leave.
George muttered nervously.
Yes, right now.
Peppa said as if she had an idea, but George was already pulling her by the hand toward the exit. Suddenly, they realized they couldn't escape on their own.
Are we stuck here forever?
Don't cry. We'll figure something out.
Peppa said, and started calling for help. Their cries brought their parents running. They were furious, but helped the piglets get out. On the way home, Peppa enthusiastically told them about the ritual hall. Her excitement frightened George. Their parents just exchanged glances and laughed. That night, Peppa said,
George, I have something special.
She pulled a small bone from under her pillow. It was glowing with a bright green light.
Peppa, you're going to get into trouble.
George warned anxiously, but Peppa didn't listen and happily played with her find. Suddenly, the floor in the nursery cracked open into two parts, and from it emerged a gigantic skeleton with red eyes, a terrible smile, black claws, and red tentacles behind its back.
You stole my bone. You will pay for this,
it said in a demonic voice. The skeleton grabbed Peppa's hand and lifted her toward the ceiling. Meanwhile, Dad and Mom Pig were sitting in the living room reading books. Suddenly, Evie ran into the room.
Bear! Where is my bear, Mommy?
Honey, he's probably lost again among your toys. Let's go find him.
Mommy Pig picked up Evie in her arms, and they headed to her room. When they opened the door, they froze in horror. Everything in the room was upside down. Walls were scratched with claws, and in the middle of the room hung Bear on a rope with black crosses instead of eyes.
My bear!
Sweetheart, it's just some evil joke.
Mom said nervously. Suddenly, they heard wild screams from Peppa's and George's nursery. The room was in chaos. George was hanging in a net in the upper corner of the room with white eyes as if hypnotized. Peppa was standing against the wall with black eyes and a creepy smile. She was whispering some spell and scratching something on the wall with a bone. Dad Pig was lying on the floor and barely managed to say, "Run!" In the center stood an ominous skeleton. It turned toward the door and whispered in that same chilling demonic voice,
Oh, we have guests. You're just in time. I just finished with these little pigs.
White is cleaner. It reveals the truth.
Today at school, a new room was announced. Her creator had something in mind. Danny was the first to enter. After some time, he came out. His face was blurred like a washed-out watercolor drawing. Black paint dripped from the holes where his eyes and mouth should have been.
It's very fun,
he said mechanically. Suddenly, a line formed. After a few days, the children's mouths disappeared. Their clothes faded to dusty gray. The children were losing their faces. Peppa was flipping through a notebook. Black, distorted faces flickered on the pages as if screaming. Suddenly, tentacles burst out of the paper and grabbed her by the arm. A burn remained on her skin. The room left traces. No one erased them. Peppa tried to preserve the colors, but the room kept erasing everything. The next day, all the students turned to Peppa in unison, with wide, identical smiles, and said in chorus,
White is cleaner. It reveals the truth.
Now, it's her turn. Ahead is light that blinds thoughts. There's no way back. From the walls slowly emerged white silhouettes with distorted features, and black handprints appeared on the surfaces. They watched, they waited. Night fell. Peppa stood in the center of the white room. With trembling hands, Peppa wrote, Yellow light, laughter, I. She tried to remember, but words no longer meant anything. She was the last. Silence remained, and Peppa, who no longer remembered anything. Peppa, George, and little Evie snuggled comfortably in bed. A bedtime story, the perfect end to the day. Peppa's gaze drifted toward the bedroom door behind which something was awakening,
I'll check the kitchen. Quickly, go to sleep.
said Mommy Pig, but she never returned.
Mom?
George and Evie looked anxiously into the semi-darkness of the corridor. The call of darkness came from there. Peppa took Evie's hand and they stepped forward into the unknown. Dark streams flowed down the walls. Each step could be their last.
Mom, where are you?
And the darkness answered. Suddenly, a splash. Ink began to rise upward. From the droplets, a silhouette appeared, almost reaching the ceiling. A thin body, tentacle-like arms covered with cracks. Two blazing red orbs for eyes. A mouth twisted into a crooked, predatory grin. Black liquid dripping from its fangs. It knows where you are and is waiting for its moment. The monster's tentacles suddenly swept at George and Evie. Peppa screamed in horror, reaching out for them, but her hands passed through the black mass. It doesn't eat, it transforms. George and Evie disappeared into the ink-like mass, and after a second, they reappeared, but already changed. Their eyes were completely black, their smiles unnaturally wide, their skin gray. Now they are his servants.
Play with us, Peppa.
Suddenly, from the depths of the corridor, Mommy and Daddy emerged, distorted, their faces smeared, eyes black, with traces of black liquid in the corners of their mouths. Even loved ones have become strangers, and now she is alone. It all started as usual. Peppa and George were playing with Evie, Peppa's younger sister.
Evie, George, let's build the tallest tower.
Suggested Peppa. Suddenly, Evie started complaining about stomach pain.
Don't worry, I'll help.
Replied Mommy. Peppa and George looked at their sister with concern. Daddy Pig went to the kitchen for medicine. As he was about to return, suddenly the lights in the room went out.
Strange,
said Daddy Pig. Suddenly, a huge black hand appeared from the darkness and grabbed him. When Daddy Pig didn't come back, Mommy Pig called Dr. Rabbit. She began examining her, but suddenly black, thin tentacles appeared from Evie's mouth.
Help!
Screamed Dr. Rabbit as Evie grabbed her and dragged her out of the nursery. Peppa and George watched in horror, unable to do anything. Meanwhile, Mommy Pig went down to the hall and stumbled upon a cocoon made of tentacles, in which Daddy Pig was barely visible. Suddenly, everything went dark again, and a second cocoon appeared nearby, this time with Mommy Pig inside. Now only Peppa and George remained in the nursery. No one could help them. They heard Evie's whisper approaching the door.
Evie?
Asked a frightened Peppa, looking toward the door. She appeared with a grim smile and completely black eyes, saying,
Now you are my toys.
Mommy noticed that the basement light was flickering. Daddy Pig went to check, and Peppa and George wanted to go with him. Daddy smiled, but he looked strange. The basement seemed very uninviting. Stone walls, a gray staircase, and a single dim bulb swinging overhead. When they descended, the door behind them closed on its own with a loud click. The light flickered. George looked back and disappeared without a sound, without a trace. Peppa ran to find him. Suddenly, doors appeared on the walls, low wooden doors like those in old cabinets. She opened one. Inside was George's old plush dinosaur, stained and dusty. It didn't move, but its eyes blinked. Suddenly, a projector light appeared on the wall. It turned on by itself. The film started playing frames, old recordings, as if from surveillance cameras. Peppa saw herself, but she was in a different basement. standing and looking into the camera, faceless. In one of the frames, there was George. He was shouting, but no sound came out. The camera jerked, and the image cut out. The floor near Peppa began to crack. Black liquid poured from the cracks. It moved toward her as if alive. Peppa screamed, and suddenly, silence. The next morning, Peppa sat alone in the kitchen. Behind her was the basement, its door slowly opening. Something supernatural was moving toward her, getting closer with each step. Peppa and George happily jumped in a muddy puddle. When they got home, Mama Pig asked Peppa to go to the attic for a jar of jam. The attic was dark and dusty. At the end of the room, Peppa saw a jar, but nearby stood a strange old lamp she had never seen before. Curious, she picked it up and took it to George. She eagerly rubbed it. Suddenly, the room filled with swirling mist, and a skeleton-like silhouette appeared before her, wearing a hat, boots, and holding a cane. Peppa and George were very frightened, but they realized it was a genie. Peppa made a wish for herself. The creature grinned eerily and said,
"At your service."
Meanwhile, Mama and Papa Pig were busy. Mama was making jam and Papa was working in his study. They had no idea what was happening in the nursery. Peppa wished that no one would ever tell her what to do and that she could do whatever she wanted. George, trembling, exclaimed, "Peppa, why are you making that wish?" Suddenly, the creature disappeared, and happy Peppa ran to tell her parents about her adventure. But when she entered the study, no one was there anymore. The kitchen was also empty. Mammy and Daddy Pig had vanished. Panic seized Peppa. She quickly ran back to the nursery to cancel her wish. When the creature reappeared, Peppa and George were horrified. Their parents, wrapped in thin tentacles, were trapped under the creature's ribs. It grinned eerily. Peppa demanded everything be undone, but the skeleton only smirked. "Silly piglet, now you are all in my power." Suddenly, their house found itself in another world where only darkness reigned. Now they were new residents of a creepy lamp. It all started like any other day. Daddy Pig was fixing a floorboard. Peppa, George, and Evie watched. Evie stared into the gap, silent, unmoving, eyes too wide.
"Don't go down there.
Daddy Pig said.
Just dust and spiders."
That night, Peppa woke up. Strange lights flickered under her door. She heard soft rustling. At the end of the hall, she saw Evie.
Peppa, we're waiting.
In the living room, the rug was gone. In its place, a gaping hole. She stepped closer. Creak, crack. A hand grabbed her. She was pulled under the floor, into darkness, cold, whispering, laughter. Then a warped version of Evie's song. Peppa trembled. Evie stood before her, body twisted, taller, eyes hollow.
"You came to play,"
she whispered. Peppa backed away, touched something. She turned and saw Daddy Pig. His eyes were glowing. She ran. Hands reached out, faces flickered. Ahead was a light. It was the silhouette of Mummy Pig. She climbed toward the light, and suddenly a white flash. She gasped in bed. In her room, she looked around, panting. Everything looked normal. She exhaled, nervously smiled. But then she looked up. Evie was on the ceiling, smiling. It was an ordinary day. Peppa's math teacher, Madame Gazelle, started coming to her house. At first, Peppa enjoyed studying with her. However, after a few days, Peppa became thin and sad. Her parents started to worry.
Peppa, you must eat.
Mama Pig insisted. But Peppa didn't want anything except math.
"Please, call Madame Gazelle."
Her parents obeyed their daughter's request. Peppa looked worse and worse. Madame Gazelle sat with her in the room and taught her mathematics. Suddenly, she pulled out a pink stone. Peppa's pupils disappeared, and she floated up as if hypnotized.
"Math is your life, Peppa,"
said Madame Gazelle with a sinister smile. Meanwhile, her parents had no idea what was happening. They were sitting in the living room watching TV.
"What an interesting movie,"
said Daddy Pig. A few days later, Peppa could no longer walk or talk.
Why isn't she getting better?
Mama Pig asked, wiping tears from her eyes. One day, Mama Pig saw Madame Gazelle smiling menacingly, holding a stone over Peppa.
What is going on here?
Shouted Mama Pig.
Get out of here, Madame Gazelle!
Said Daddy Pig, looking at her with suspicion. The room darkened. Madame Gazelle transformed into a terrible monster that only said one thing.
Math will take over the world. Bow to it.
A cold wind blew. Everything around turned into a tornado of notebooks and numbers. In the morning, everyone sat at the table with crazy faces. They were solving problems while Madame Gazelle loomed over them as if controlling their minds. It was an ordinary day. Peppa saw a new game on Daddy Pig's computer called Coin Collection. She started collecting coins, and everything seemed fun and harmless. At first, Peppa enjoyed the game, but day by day, she became more absorbed and lost track of time. Soon, dark circles appeared under her eyes, and the joy disappeared. One sunny day, Mommy Pig was tidying up toys in the nursery. She hadn't seen Peppa for a while and decided to check on her. Mommy Pig entered the room to turn off the computer, but what she saw shocked her. Peppa was sitting in her chair with wires connected to her head.
Mom, I'm almost at the final level.
Peppa exclaimed, her eyes clouded. Mommy Pig rushed to disconnect the wires, but as soon as she reached for them, Peppa raised her hand. Another wire appeared out of nowhere and plunged into Mommy Pig's neck. Soon she found herself next to Peppa, absorbed in the screen. Meanwhile, George and Daddy Pig were watching a show about Mr. Potato in the living room. George asked where Peppa was. Daddy Pig shrugged. George decided to check what was happening in the room. He entered and saw Peppa and Mama connected to the computer. He stood there, overwhelmed with fear, but before he could do anything, a wire shot into his neck as well. He too fell under the influence of the game. Daddy Pig also grew bored, sitting alone in the room, so he went to call the family for an evening movie. He entered the room and saw that everyone was now playing. Deciding to stop this madness, he turned off the computer. However, the screen still flickered on. Suddenly, a wire shot forward and connected to Daddy Pig's neck. He froze. His eyes clouded over, and he too succumbed to the game. Suddenly, the lights went out. Now the entire family sat on the sofa in the living room with empty eyes. Wires protruded from their necks. The TV flickered ominously, showing a terrible grimace.